Hello, my dear friends. We're getting close to Christmas. It's almost the end of our Advent devotions. And I want to turn to one that's, to me, very interesting and maybe not one we always think about as a prophecy of Jesus. It's not a direct prophecy, but there are lots of interesting parallels. And I want to focus on some of those today. I want to go to the book of Esther, the story of Esther. It's a very interesting book for a number of reasons. One, it happens just 400 years or so before Jesus' birth. It's one of the books written closest to the birth of Jesus, and it's set in Persia, not in Israel. And it presents Esther as it presents the story of Esther, which has several parallels with the life of Jesus. If you haven't read the story or don't remember the story, go back and read it. It's a fascinating story. One of the things that makes it so interesting is God is never mentioned in the whole story. Never once mentioned. It talks about the Jewish people. It talks about what's going to happen to them in Persia, but it never mentions God once, which is interesting. Perhaps one of the reasons, perhaps it was written during a time when the Jewish people were also being persecuted, and it was dangerous to do that. But nevertheless, points out to how God is in control of all things. It's clear as you read the story. The story goes, King Xerxes, king of Persia, elevates Esther to be his queen. I won't go through how that happens. You'll have to read the story. But Esther keeps her family background sort of secret. She's Jewish, but she doesn't publicize that, so no one really knows that. But her uncle, Mordecai, keeps in touch with her as she becomes the queen to King Xerxes. Time goes on, and one of King Xerxes' advisors convinces Xerxes to sign a decree that makes it legal to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. They're afraid they're going to take over, and so Haman convinces Xerxes to sign this decree that anyone can kill any of the Jewish people. Of course, Esther's family finds out about this, and their lives are in danger. And not only are Esther's family's lives in danger, but should Esther's heritage be discovered, her life would be in danger as well. So Mordecai sends word to Esther to try to convince her to intercede on their behalf, to stand in the king's presence, to convince the king to rescind this order. Esther doesn't want to, because you see, it's a very dangerous thing to go stand in the king's presence, unbidden. If you enter the king's presence without him asking for you, he can have you put to death. It's only safe to go to the king's presence when he summons you. And as Mordecai tries to convince her, at first Esther doesn't want to, of course, because it's so dangerous, but then he sends this message to her. And I want to read this message because it has some fascinating parallels. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this." That's sort of the pivot of the whole story. And that convinces Esther to indeed risk her life. She goes and stands in the king's presence, intercedes on behalf of the Jewish people, and indeed they're saved. Do you catch some of the parallels? Esther goes to the king's presence, risks her life to save God's people. But I like that verse where it talks about, "Who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this." There's this great verse in one of Paul's letters where he mentions, when the time had fully come, God sent his son. God's timing is always perfect. Esther was there at just the right time. God sent his son at just the right time to intercede on behalf of God's people, to offer their lives, in Esther's case, if necessary, as a sacrifice, for Jesus to offer his life as a sacrifice for his people. They're fascinating parallels, and in the end, God's people are saved. We thank God for Esther and caring for the Jewish people in Persia. We thank God for his son, who came to save us as God's people. Go read the story of Esther. See if you can find some other parallels as well. We'll talk again tomorrow. God be with you.